Today I'm here with Tilek Mamutov. You've been such a gracious host, so I'm really happy to be able to welcome you to ReRoute here instead of you welcoming me to your host country, because we're doing this live from Kyrgyzstan. So welcome, Tilek.
Great. Well, welcome to Kyrgyzstan, Gavan, and thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Absolutely.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. 100%.
So Tilek and I met a number of years ago at a event called CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality, and maybe you can. I'm happy to talk a little bit about what I felt, but maybe you can tell me a little bit about the CFAR workshop from your point of view.
Yes, I loved it. I think it was definitely life-changing.
Yeah.
I made several friends.
Yeah.
I'm still in touch with on a regular basis, including you.
Yeah.
And it helped me with some big career shifts and just think of the world differently in general.
Yeah.
And I'm still very much in touch with the organization and with the community. And the whole concept of applied rationality was new to me, and it was not very clear what the training is going to be about.
Yep.
And it was nice that my employer paid for it.
Yeah.
Nice. Fully, I think, or half of it. I think fully.
Yeah.
That's why it was easier for me to sign up, but I wasn't sure, and I would describe it as a training in rational thinking and rational actions. Just that's my concept, and that's how I generally think of rationality. Is rational thinking is more like critical thinking.
Yep.
And rational actions is when you think you should go to the gym and you manage to go to the gym instead of you need to go but you actually don't manage to.
Totally.
Or you want to meditate but you don't. Well, how do you actually meditate if you really think you need to? That's what I call like a rational action. And I think it was more focused on actual rational actions than thinking. The whole community is really much into rational thinking as well. But the training was more about that, and it was a 3-day training, I believe, where we stayed overnight on bunk beds.
Yes.
So it's kind of faster to make friends by living together.
Yeah, I remember learning. It's hilarious to me, some of just like the random pragmatic skills that I've learned through those workshops. Like I think that was the first time I slept with an eye mask and earplugs. Was in those dorms. Yeah.
No way. That's where I learned how to floss, actually. Well, not to learn to floss, but I started flossing, actually.
Nice.
Because I knew, and like doctors tell you to do this many times, but that's when I actually started flossing, and I still do from that day. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's. So maybe we can. I can give it like a little bit more context. Yeah. So it's this organization that's existed for maybe 8 years, something like that, maybe a little bit longer. But the idea is, trying to both research methods by kind of aggregating a bunch of like behavioral psychology and sort of cognitive neuroscience research in order to figure out how to help people reduce their human biases and also helping them sort of achieve their goals in better ways, right? And I know that one of the reasons why I bring this up is because I know that this has been a big part of my life, and I think part of your life. And given that it was the place that we met, it felt like it would be a interesting topic for us to go into. Was there particular kind of like techniques or things that stuck with you from those workshops that?
Yes, many. Like I actually took copious notes, and I came up with a flow chart of main techniques. I think like 15 techniques. I don't know if you've seen the flow chart, but I basically tried to map it as like, are you extremely happy all the time? Yes or no? If no, then try this technique. And then you just go through the flow chart and you try different techniques, different points of your life. One technique that clearly changed, I believe, rerouted my career was goal factoring.
Yes.
Yes, when you have a certain goal, for example, get a PhD or, have children, or it could be any goal. So you put it, on a diagram,
Yep.
and then you try to break it down into sub goals,
Yep.
and try to hack it basically. So like with number factoring, right? You have a number 36, and you factor it like 2, 3, etc., etc. So you factor out the goal, and one of the big goals was at the time to become a product. I was at Google.
Yep.
And I was on a technical program manager side. I wanted to become a product manager. So that was like a goal. And I tried to break it down, like why did I want to have this goal? And it's like, have more influence in the organization and higher salary, et cetera. And then the trick is, can you actually replace this goal with something else?
Right.
And this way you realize what sub-goals are actually important, which ones are not, and it helps you find other ways to solve the problem, because sometimes it's not the best to get a PhD or get an MBA or children or something
maybe
like
there's two different things that you can do. You could like split it up where it's maybe like you don't have to get all of these 8 things that you're trying to get out of this PhD from a single thing, right? Maybe you can do 2 different things, like a side project and a different a training, right, that combines to the same goals.
Yes. So for me, basically, I broke it down into like 12 sub goals, and at the time I was a technical program manager on paper.
Yep.
But in reality, it was like more like a project lead. And I realized that if I stay like that, then I actually hit a lot of my goals, except one, which is it's kind of fancy to become a product manager at Google, and there's a lot of social status, and kind of my ego was involved, and it was like a goal that I had for years, like a dream to have become a product manager at Google. And on the other side, if I really wanted to become a product manager, then I would have to abide by certain rules and hit certain metrics and have certain number of people in the team. I would have to kind of morph my project into something, or I'd have to switch to a less interesting project. And I didn't want to do that. So I realized like, okay, I have to give up on this one thing, which is much more like ego focused and social status focused, and try to focus on other bigger, like more important goals, is like have more impact, et cetera, et cetera. And then other things would come as well, where like more recognition and like easier to do a startup after that. So I actually would hit like 11 out of 12, but it was very cool to clearly see this more emotional goal, and you have to kind of let it go.
I thought one of the things that was interesting for me to make sure that I was doing in goal factoring was they tell you to make sure you even include the goals that you're not proud of, right? So, impress my parents, or or gain status or whatever, right? Yeah, because some of the times it's not even that. Like you feel guilty for having these goals, but that doesn't mean that they're not important, right? You still might care about like impressing your parents or having status. It might not mean it's absolutely ridiculous, but there might be other ways of doing that, or maybe you don't care, right? But I liked that. I love that technique, and I think it's a good example of those sorts of ways of thinking.
I wanted to add to this. I think it's a great concept. One concept I learned at Google is, if something were to leak to New York Times and it's on the front cover, you shouldn't be ashamed, right? You should be proud of it. Like if any conversation that you're messaging your colleague or anything like that, and I really like the concept. It motivates you to do better. And for a while, it was like one of my favorite concepts is just live your life so that if anything were to leak. And I honestly like my email conversations for like years, if anything were to leak, it was like be okay. And actually for my wife she kind of felt it. It's like, Tilek, sometimes I feel like you're living your life as if like this is like a like a TV show.
Right.
What's the TV show where like the whole world is watching and it's like it's just me and you and like we're here. So I feel like it went too far. And now I actually think of the reverse concept where if you had your goals clearly stated for yourself and it leaks and you're not ashamed,
Right.
it's probably they are not honest goals, right? So oftentimes it
Interesting.
could be something sexual, for example, right?
Sure, yeah.
If in that case, if you never mention sex in your goals, right? Are you really 100% honest?
Sure.
Oftentimes could be not, right?
Yeah.
So it's just one of the more like clear examples.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of hard to be very honest. So I feel like I was focused on being honest with the outside world, but I was not very honest with the inside world.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to do both, because if you're genuinely honest with yourself, sometimes you're doing things that society is not really ready for. I mean, everything that happens at Burning Man,
Yeah, no,
like, is a good example. Where
Yeah.
at Burning Man, people try to be more honest with themselves,
Right.
and it can look weird to the outside world,
Yeah.
and oftentimes illegal. So yes,
Because I think you're right, where it's like would you can think about what it would look like if it was, leaked or whatever, but you have to look at it through exactly, like as you're saying, through the lens of your own values or through the values of the people that you care about, right? That seem to be channeling the same thing. Because there's a lot of things that you can stress yourself out about a lot that is just stuff that feels like it shouldn't matter, or stuff that people shouldn't be ashamed of, right? Yeah. I'm interested to maybe touch a little bit briefly, as we're kind of on this topic of sort of values. We've talked a little bit about, we're both involved in kind of tech startups, and this idea of how we sort of enshrine and sort of establish like values and principles and stuff like that for organizations. I know, so you have a startup now called Outtalent, which is pretty cool, and you guys just went. Can I talk about?
Of course, yes, please.
So you just did your international release. It used to be for sort of Central Asia, and you guys did your international release a few days ago, and congratulations on that. So my understanding is basically you guys do you help sort of engineers in sort of like Central Asia and other sort of maybe like developing economies who want to get jobs at these sort of like top tier companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook, and you help them sort of like polish up their skills and make themselves sort of presentable to these companies. Is that a fair way of talking about it? Did I miss
yes. So
anything?
we help great software engineers get great jobs at top companies, and we focus on developing countries. So for now, we've been focused on relocation. For example, you relocate from Kyrgyzstan to, let's say, to work for Google in London or Zurich. And we think it's amazing for the person, and we think it's better for the world. It's a separate conversation. And yes, we help with algorithms and data structures, distributed system design, behavioral interviews, resume building, and we make sure we work with engineering managers and recruiters, and through our community, make sure that people get more chances to get interviewed. And at the end, we also help with salary negotiations. This way, great engineers can put their best foot forward and get more offers and better offers, and find a company that is better matching for them. Because oftentimes, they don't come from a famous college or don't work for a famous company. And they get lost in the sea of resumes. And it's harder for somebody from another country, because the recruiters oftentimes don't have a context of like, what does this university in Kyrgyzstan even mean? Right. So yes, that's what we do, and I love it. And one topic that I love talking to you about is like company building and organization building, because I want organization to be like a separate entity. And then I wonder like what will happen if I will not be there. What do I want this organization to keep doing? And that's what brought me to the mission and the values and the principles. And
how do you sort of package that up in a way that, like, if you get hit by a bus or if you move on to something else, right, it sort of keeps going with this,
Yes, that's why I love doing this. It's like Saturday morning, it's kind of what motivates me. I like going to a coffee shop and just like thinking about the culture and like the actual DNA of the organization. For me, it's like a hobby.
Nice.
I have to pace myself and not to spend too much time on the philosophy and more time on the actual, on the actions, but it's something I really love doing.
Nice. When you were thinking about kind of designing, we've talked a little bit about kind of the differences between like valuables, principles, and mission. I know you thought about a lot about that when you were putting them for this company. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about those things?
Sure. Yeah. So mission, I really like missions. I think it should be there. So we have a mission. Then I thought of values, and the values I think of them as one word usually things where they could be used as an adjective and applied to a person. Like, oftentimes, like honesty, right? Similar to integrity or ambition. So that's what I think of as values. And principles I think of as more like similar to rules, where it's usually like a short phrase. I know that some companies use that as values. They have like phrases as values. I don't think there's a rule for this.
Sure, yeah.
But that's what I like.
That's how you break it down.
I like when values are like one-word things, like courage. And of course it needs clarification because if it's one word, different people will. I mean, any value or principle needs a clarification, but I like the way Ray Dalio uses the word principles, so that's where I try to use it as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've found that seems to help a lot with this stuff is thinking about kind of the opposite of it, or what does it look like if we are not being courageous, and helping to share examples of that. I know one of the conversations that we had about was like having like postmortems or talking about was there a time where we didn't demonstrate this value, right?
Yes.
And if we're able to give examples of that, I feel like it really helps to clarify what those mean, right? Because sometimes those words can just feel empty, right? But as soon as there's examples, or especially sort of like honest examples of when they weren't upheld, it feels like that helps a lot, right?
Yes, and I think that's where we could learn from religions.
Oh yeah? Yeah.
Like for a while I was very strong atheist, where I was I was a child, and I was religious for some time, and I became an atheist where I just rejected religion and was kind of angry. Yeah. Angry atheist. And then later, now I'm like more agnostic and kind of want to learn what it has to offer. And I think like Bible has a lot of stories, right? Because Bible tries to kind of instill certain values, and stories, I think, it seems to be a great way to do it for people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot easier to kind of like place yourself in that situation, right? And having, seeing the sort of like thought process or how one can make decisions rather than just sort of arbitrary words. And yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because it's like, there's this sense in which you can have companies that are sort of directed top down, right? Where you have somebody that's sort of setting out all of the missions, all of the plans, all of the kinds of things. And that works to a certain point, works to a certain scale, but then you have to, for a lot of reasons, retention and all this kind of stuff, enable people to make their own decisions, right? And having really good, well-established values and principles and mission statements and the sort of like why and how is kind of the only way that people can do those independent decisions in a way that's aligned. Right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I believe it's Netflix. Reed Hastings, I believe, who initially they had a lot of manuals on like how to do things, and it was like really nice to work. And then he realized that if you have people who love manuals, then they're not gonna be good at leadership and decision making.
Interesting.
So he decided to do more high level things, and I try to also like state what the values and principles are, so that people don't have to have clear manuals for decisions. But I think you brought up an interesting subject where, like, how much do you, even with the values, how much of it do you want to be top down versus bottom up? Again, I'm going to bring up Burning Man again, because Burning Man is quite successful as an organization, I believe, in terms of its influence on the world. I think it had a tremendous amount of influence.
Yeah, memetically, certainly, yeah. Memetically, I was going to say, certainly, yes.
Yes, yeah, and even financially, for example. Dustin Moskowitz wrote a blog post. He's one of the co-founders of Facebook, where he attributes donating with his wife, I think, or pledging 99% of his wealth to Burning Man, clearly.
Really?
So,
Wow.
so it's just one person, right? Of course, it's a very unusual person. But I highly recommend people reading this blog post. It's pretty short. So that's one example of how Burning Man impacted the world, and now it impacts children in Africa, right? For example, who are getting bed nets, and yes, some people are having crazy
What's the
time.
connection there? Yeah.
So because he pledged a lot of his wealth, and they actually started good ventures and open philanthropy.
And you're saying he pledged it because of his experiences at Burning Man?
He linked it to Burning Man.
I see. Yeah.
He said that Burning Man inspired him to do this.
Nice.
So I believe Burning Man has a lot of impact this way. So I learned a lot about Burning Man as an organization and culture. I watched a ton of videos with Larry Harvey, who's a founder or one of the co-founders. And I think he's an amazing philosopher of our times. It's, of course, very sad that he passed away recently. So, and his approach was like, it should come kind of from the bottom, but I think they curated it like informally, but then over time, after a few years, he basically stated out, like he wrote 10 principles based on what worked from the community. So I think it seems to be working quite well.
Interesting.
Like in terms of culture, it's a pretty strong culture where people can be under a lot of substances, like really drunk, and then they would still clean up after themselves.
Right. Yes.
It would be fascinating to me because like they could barely walk and talk, but they had this principle of like leaving no trace and removing trash after themselves. So it was very interesting for me to see like the culture in play.
And I think there's a couple of things to say that's powerful about those principles. I think one that you mentioned that I just wanted to highlight was that it was derived from sort of things that were noticed to work well, right? Because sometimes you want to set them out ahead of time, but it also feels like it's useful to sort of search what has been working well, right?
Yes. So that's why, like, even though I stated them, like the values and principles, we kind of we should keep them, I think, a little bit loose and kind of see what the people come up with, and I think just have this dance. Well, like, okay, these are the stated principles, because we are so early. It's just 2 years.
Right.
It's been 2 years, and it's like I'm doing it for the first time, right?
Yes.
I'm a total noob. Yes, I read quite a lot about values and culture, but still, just really just starting. So, but I think it's good to have some idea of what you want, and then just see what works.
Yes.
And I love the adventure.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's so cool about those values is, it's easy to sort of put values that anybody could have in their mission statement, but it's hard to have ones that are so precise that I think, like, if you look at the Burning Man values, you read them and you're like, oh, that's Burning Man, right? Like, they are specific enough where it is almost intrinsically tied to the organization, right? Like, they are very specific. Leave no trace. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are. Safety.
Radical inclusion.
What is it?
Radical. There's a lot of radicals.
Yes. Radical self-reliance.
Radical self-reliance.
Yes. Very
that
much
is
Burning Man.
very Burning Man value. Yep. Yes. You would. Yes. Very few organizations have that.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's good. I think I was hearing from somebody about the Burning Man Rangers are the sort of folks that sort of like help people out. Kind of like the mix between the medical and police emergencies, whatever. But they're very much about that radical self-reliance. At least they're supposed to. Where it's just kind of like the first thing they'll do is they'll just kind of like go over and be like, okay, how are you going to solve your own problem, right? And maybe eventually they'll try to connect you to someone. But I just love how that ethos is spread throughout the organization. And I think to that point, right? Harvey just passed, but the principles were set up in such a way where this organization is, without a doubt, going to continue along those same lines, which is very, very cool.
I'm glad to hear your optimism.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so. Awesome. So one of the things that we, it's I think with this whole ReRoute theme, we always talk about sort of like where things could go with the status quo and how they can be better. And I really like this idea of trying to really ensure that we enshrine very good values and principles and such into our organizations that are more specific and are sort of updated with all these new learnings. Much in the way, I think in our first episode, we talked about with the Long Now Foundation, it's always about how can you sort of like have something around you last longer than you, right? And one of the other things that we were looking at as far as, that I know you've given a lot of thought to, as far as things that we can strive to sort of do better in this coming century and might be very important, is sort of recognizing human potential, right? And this is one of the things that I think you guys do through Outtalent. And maybe you can tell me a little bit about how you sort of think about that, or sort of why that is such an important thing to you. Yeah.
Sure, yes. So I was born and raised here in Bishkek. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And tell the story as part of this, yeah.
And I was, I would say, ambitious as a child. I remember wanting to win a Nobel Prize at some point when I was like, I don't know, 9 or 10. And then when I became a teenager, I lost a lot of interest in education. I feel like it was a lot of forced education. Was kind of was becoming a bit of a rebel.
Yeah.
I like computer science and math. I was really good there. It was easy for me. But everything else pretty much I rebelled against.
Yeah.
It was very difficult for me to study, and I was getting worse grades, and my self-esteem was kind of getting lower and lower. And I think it's maybe the environment, or just growing older, and I kind of forgot that ambition. And then I got into college, and similar thing happened where I was like really focused on certain subjects I was really passionate about, and then getting bad grades everywhere else. And my ambition changed drastically. I remember the biggest ambition I had is to get a master's degree in Japan. It was part of my password even. I was just trying to it's kind of like a self-affirmation to do it. And then I graduated with a lot of difficulty. My GPA was 2.9 out of 4. It was even hard to get there. And then I stayed with that GPA. It was very hard to get scholarships for master's degree. And I didn't have much money. Yeah. So I found one scholarship, but you had to, for Japan, but you had to have 2 years of experience or to be of a certain age. I really didn't like that at all. But yeah, so you had to spend 2 years and like just get work experience. So I decided, okay, I'm just gonna be in Kyrgyzstan for 2 years, just do something. And I would just take random freelance jobs and work in a bunch of companies. My salary at the time, well, I didn't have proper salary, but I approximate the total income I would get in a year as $4,000. So it was not that much, and it was very intermittent.
Yep.
And that's when I get this email saying, hey, would you be interested in working at Google? It has a fun working environment, like table tennis, like ping pong tables, and medical insurance, paid education, etc., etc., etc.
Yep.
I was like, this looks like a scam. Why would they find me? Yes. I was very suspicious. And I remember my mom was sure it was a scam. She was like, don't reply, don't send them any money. Then turns out they found my resume online on monster.com.
Yeah.
And the only reason I had the resume there was a visiting American teacher. Her name is Gail.
Yeah.
In college, she forced us basically to create a resume online as homework.
Nice.
And just ever since I kept it up to date because I wanted to remember my accomplishments because I thought I would forget them. So I just kept it up to date, and I would sometimes visit the website to see what skills are in demand. Usually, like what programming languages are in demand. Because I knew in Kyrgyzstan we use not very modern programming languages, and that's how they found me. And turns out it was actually Google. Then I applied.
So what were the sorts of things on your resume at this time?
Yes, it was a mixed bag of things.
Yeah.
And I asked the recruiter later, the Google recruiter, like what interested them.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had a lot of work experience, even though I just graduated. I started working from the first year. Well, actually, I did a website for my high school too. So I had a lot of work experience. I stayed to work as a teacher of computer science just after graduation. I think I was the youngest teacher in the history.
Nice.
Most of the students, like a lot of the students, were older than me. And I learned Italian and Japanese. And I had won an Italian scholarship. So I spent some time in Italy learning Italian language and culture.
Nice.
We were learning Italian gestures. So we literally had a lesson on Italian gestures.
Awesome.
There's these are the gestures of this part of Italy, and these are Sicilian gestures. It was one of my favorite lessons.
Yep.
So languages, teaching. So yes, that's what they saw, that I had technical skills, like programming languages. I had soft skills, since I could explain, and I had a bunch of awards, and I was good at languages. And it was useful for the search quality team at Google, where you had to have all of those skills. And that's actually interesting because in the real world, a lot of jobs require a mixed grab of skills. So it's like a grab bag of skills. And you don't know which ones you're gonna match. And then if you're lucky, that's you will find something, or you need to have a lot of, apply to many jobs, but that's one of the things I learned.
Nice. Yeah, so they brought you on as part of the search quality team, right?
Yes, and it was always like a weak spot, right? There's a fancier way to explain this job, which is more like investigative, CIA kind of FBI type of investigations, where you investigate criminal networks almost of very smart people trying to get into search results by tricking Google. And those people, they would use, that was 2007, they would use their own version of AI with Markov chains to generate websites which would look like they're generated by a human. And
just
the text
for those
written
who
by a
aren't
human.
familiar with Markov chains, it's basically just it's kind of like autocomplete, right? It's like the thing on your cell phone where it keeps writing the sentence based on other.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes. So it's a statistical technique to kind of generate sentences. And even as a human, pretty educated human, it would be very difficult to say, was it actually a weird human who wrote it in a weird state?
Right.
Or maybe somebody with a mental health problem. Or was it actually auto-generated? So that was quite interesting. That was before neural networks kind of had a resurgence, right? And it was really fascinating to kind of battle against them, because it was kind of a war, right? It was a cat and mouse game as well. And on the other hand, the less fancier way to describe it was internet janitors, because we look at the worst parts of the internet, a ton of porn, really bad looking pages, and you look at them for a really long time. So that was the way to kind of get into Google. And later I would get fancier and fancier jobs, but honestly, it was a very interesting time. I was really enjoying it, to be honest, for some time. After a while, it gets boring. But yes, those very, very interesting years.
There's a couple key things I remember. I don't remember the specifics, but that got you recognized to sort of jump up in Google. Wasn't there? Was it the translation stuff that you were working on, or what was the?
So my main work was focusing on search quality in Russian language.
Yeah.
And in parallel, because I knew Kyrgyz language,
Yeah.
they asked to, they had this bug hunt across Google, where if you find bugs in a certain language, you get an award. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna sign up, I know Kyrgyz language.
Yeah.
And I started looking for typos in Kyrgyz language. And what's cool about Google, it allowed users to translate pages to any language.
Oh, yeah.
The disadvantage of it, there were a lot of typos
Sure.
on like a user interface. And for me, it was very easy to find those typos.
Yeah.
And I ended up, I think, winning either first place or second place. So I won an award across whole Google for finding most bugs in the language. And for me, that's where I realized, like, knowing my Kyrgyz language could be an advantage. It's not a useless thing completely.
Yeah.
It could be some advantage.
Yeah.
And then I signed up on a website, on like a database that I know this language. And then I was asked to translate a Google holiday logo, a Google Doodle.
Yeah, yeah. Nice.
Right. So I spent about few minutes, like 2 or 3 minutes, to translate Happy New Year in Kyrgyz language. You know, how much time does it take? Right, it's like seconds. So I translated it, and then for New Year's, they launched it for the first time with the Kyrgyz, basically, alt text. When you roll over your mouse on the logo, it just shows in Kyrgyz, "Jonga Jilniliz Darminen."
Yeah, nice.
And once it's launched, I had a Twitter account, so I tweeted about it. It's like, "Hey guys, we are this is going to be in Kyrgyz language now," and that made the news in Kyrgyzstan.
Nice.
And the news was like, "Oh, Google's starting to speak, Kyrgyz," and it was like it's like maybe in some ways the biggest holiday in Kyrgyzstan. So it created a ton of positive news, and my relatives started calling my parents and congratulating them. Nice. And I could have been working like 100 hours, or I don't know, many hours a week on one thing, like a search quality, would get no social recognition.
Right.
A little bit from my manager maybe.
Sure.
And then I spent few seconds and I get so much recognition from the whole country.
Yeah.
There were multiple news articles about it, and yes, I got a lot. My parents were very happy. So since then I realized, like, could be good use of my time to do things there, and I started doing more and more projects like that. And the biggest projects I launched is Google Translate in our language. So I initiated it and helped organize. Then Google Street View. And also having Google servers in Kyrgyzstan, so that we could cache the most popular videos and Android apps locally. What it makes the download much faster and much cheaper for the users and for the country itself, for the mobile operators. It basically increased the YouTube traffic in the country about threefold within 6 months.
Is that right?
The whole country, yes.
Yeah.
And again, I spent like 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most efficient uses of my times ever. So I realized like maybe I should do more of that.
Yes.
It seems way more efficient, like 100x or maybe more. So that's kind of what's been happening. It's like one of the things that's been happening.
And that seems
in my
so
career
much
at Google.
Yeah, so much the way of kind of finding ways of sort of moving up in the world or creating more impact or doing whatever is, it always requires that kind of creativity, right? It's like not doing the sort of path that was laid out. It's finding like the small little places to...
Yes, and it's one of the stories of following your passion. Like, Steve Jobs has his own story and everyone has their own story. This is my story. I like followed either passion or just natural curiosity. I was like, Kyrgyz language, I'm just gonna, when I was translating the Google holiday logo, I did not think this will be good for my career. It was like, just like zero chance, right? It's like, that was totally not what I was doing it. I was just doing it for fun, and I just thought it was gonna be cool. And I was not doing it for social recognition, I don't believe so.
Sure.
Just thought it would be cool.
Yeah.
Google's gonna speak Kyrgyz language, wouldn't be. That was like, also takes few seconds.
That's awesome.
And I just following this natural curiosity and natural passion just led me to like really, really big project. And I met former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt.
Yep, nice.
And his team through this way, I would say.
Yep.
And for my colleagues, it was a big deal. It's like, oh wow, Tilek, you met Eric Schmidt.
Yeah.
And because before that, I thought this is like a forgotten, it was actually a forgotten region, Central Asia. If I talk to heads of Asia Pacific at Google, APAC, they would be like, I don't know if Central Asia is in Asia. It's like they speak Russian. If I talk to Europe, Middle East, Africa, it's like, I don't know if Central Asia is in Europe, it's Asia.
Right.
And it speaks Russian, but we're really busy with Russia. Yeah. Like Russia is a very difficult market for Google. And it was clearly forgotten, like literally forgotten.
Yeah.
In the lists of countries, you would not be in the Europe, Middle East, Africa, and would not be in Asia Pacific.
Wow.
And so that's how I found my niche, right? So I feel like sometimes in the world, you can stumble upon a niche, which nobody cares about.
Yeah.
And then that's where you can, grow in very unusual, unpredictable ways.
Yeah. And that feels like a very good lesson for, because as we're sort of talking about this, helping people find their human potential, their sort of route to impact and all that kind of stuff, it feels like that is that's such a key lesson, right? Yeah,
I think, so with Google, one big lesson I was supposed to get is that I underestimated myself, right? I never thought of applying to Google myself or even abroad because I thought I was not good enough because I would get rejections even locally in Kyrgyzstan from employers. And it's funny to compare myself to Einstein, but it was very fascinating to me that even Einstein had a ton of rejections trying to apply for jobs. He was completely undervalued, right? So it's a story of everyone, I believe. I don't think it's just Einstein. So if you get a ton of rejections from employers, it could be totally not you. It could be them. They just cannot recognize your talent and your skills. So I was supposed to learn that lesson, but I think I didn't learn it from the first time. When I was applying from Google in Europe to move to US, because that was another dream of mine, I applied to a lot of teams and I got a lot of rejections. And I already was giving up and wanted to leave Google to kind of move back to Kyrgyzstan to focus on education. And then a friend of mine, Suhair, she said, oh, Tilek, you should talk to Google X. They have cool teams and are all there. And I already mentioned my high school where basically I didn't remember any physics or chemistry or biology. And I didn't have any experience with hardware. And Google X was about hardware and balloons and drones and robots and cars. I thought, Suhair, I think I'm going to waste their time. So thank you very much. I don't think I should meet them. And she said, oh, but just meet a friend of mine. He's really nice. Maybe in the future they will have a role for you. What do you have to lose? I said, okay, I'll go. And I met Mauro. He was focused on the business side of Project Loon, the balloon internet for developing countries. And we really hit it off. I think just got great chemistry together. We realized we have a lot of passion for emerging markets, for connectivity. And we realized that a lot of another weird set of skills I had was uniquely applicable for him. And the skill set was working on developing countries, working with telecom, telcos, working on Wi-Fi, working on maps, and there were 6-7 skills. And when I was using those skills, applying for other roles, clear roles like product manager on YouTube or partnership manager or developer relations, I wasn't good enough for one particular role. I was too much of a generalist. I ended up being too much of a generalist, but I was weirdly applicable for this role. Plus, it was chemistry, and in the end, that's the only job I got. It was Google X. It was the hardest one, and I think that's the last time I underestimated myself. Maybe now I overestimate myself, but I don't think I underestimated. I decided never ever to do it again.
Yeah. I
would rather make a mistake of overestimating my potential, and I do that the same for other people. Right? So if anyone applies to Outtalent and says, I want to work at SpaceX or wherever, Disney, Netflix, I always think they can do it.
Absolutely.
And I always just kind of discuss how they can do it instead of whether they can do it or not.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure most of our listeners probably know about Google X, but for those who don't, it's like the elite of the elite, craziest moonshot projects that Google does. And yeah, what was it? Without going into anything you can't talk about, what was something that you appreciated the most about working there, and then what was one of the things that was the most frustrating about working there?
Interesting. Yes, appreciate it. I mean, the level of talent is just crazy. I had people who assemble helicopters in their spare time.
Wow.
And there were people who, from various backgrounds, there was sculptors and fashion designers, all working on the same project on the same roof.
Yeah, I thought that blew my mind. I don't know if we can talk about what project it was, but the fact that they brought in a fashion designer to do some hardcore engineering work.
Yes, very proud is Pam.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating, the diversity of talent.
Yep.
Really kind of, it shows how diversity can actually help, neural, mental diversity, and in addition to ethnic and gender diversity. So the level of talent, they all on the same roof. There's like one big building, and it really tries to make sure most people are there.
Yep.
It's very hard to maintain, but that's amazing that people with all of these backgrounds under the same roof. So that's extremely unique, and I'm extremely grateful that I managed to get there and spend some time there. I mean, the culture, I learned a lot from there in terms of innovation. One of my favorite things is about being weird, not to be afraid to be weird.
Yeah.
Because the belief is that to be really innovative and coming up with genuinely new things, you have to be less afraid of social opinions.
Yes.
And just in the everyday life, and Astro Taylor, who is the CEO of X, sets a great example by almost always being on rollerblades.
Right.
And sometimes like walking up the stairs with like a big tray, like full of food and drink.
Yeah.
Like that's very cool to see.
I love to hear you plug in that encouraging people to be weird. That was one of the when we were talking with Sean Faircloth, that mayor and state senator guy. That was a lot about what we were talking about, was how to encourage people who are more weird to get into politics, right? Because a lot of people self-censor, Yeah.
Yeah, huge censorship in politics for sure. Self-censorship.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it went too far, and I think that's one of the reasons Donald Trump won, right? It's just because he appeared to be more genuine,
right?
And like speak what on his mind and things like that.
People are kind of
I think it went too far, yes.
Yeah.
And I think with new politics, like Andrew Yang, you can be weird and genuine. I think like there's new wave of politicians that are learning how to kind of be honest and a little bit weird.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I learned and I cherish from X.
And then what was frustrating?
Yeah, so the biggest thing, I think, the level of risk. I've been leading my own project for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I make a mistake, if I use somebody's data source and they copied Oracle's data, let's say, Google can be sued for billions of dollars.
Right.
And the job of lawyers is to prevent that.
Yeah.
And if you're a small startup, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
But if you're Google, even if you're at X, you still have that risk. Because legally you're still Google, and Oracle will be really happy to see you
Yes.
if you have a little bit of their data. So I realized there's a lot of risk involved, even though they try to make sure it's like a startup. At X I have the most freedom, where Astro would say, my job is to set the rules and your job is to break them. Like, who else says that as a CEO?
Yeah.
And so I really was really enjoying a lot of freedom there, but still there's a limit, and it's just natural.
Yeah.
And what's cool is it encouraged me to start my own company, because I realized, I felt all the challenges that a big organization has to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So I'm really not afraid to compete with Google on anything.
Yeah.
Because I know what's on the other side.
Yeah,
any
funny.
project, any project, whatever, just Google Calendar, even search.
Yeah.
And I feel like I know what's on the other side. It's gonna be it's difficult to compete with Google, but there's so many challenges, like bureaucracy and politics. I think Google's doing a tremendous job, but still, there's just natural politics that's gonna be in any big organization.
Yeah.
And just feeling it through just encouraged me to start the company.
Man, when we were doing technical diligence on the AltSpace acquisition, it just blew my mind, some of the things and it made sense once you look at it, but they ran our code base through a search engine that pulled every single line of code that was taken from Stack Overflow, and found every it's just all these things where you're you'd never think about copying a line of Stack Overflow, but then they have this just every we had to look at every single library that was being in NPM that was linked into Node, our Node projects, and it's just nuts. And
well, you have to say thanks to Larry Ellison probably for this. No, well, I'm glad Google won that lawsuit. I think it's a big win for tech in general.
This was the copying the APIs, right? Is that what you were talking
Java,
about?
Yeah. Java,
or making compatible APIs. Why don't we put it that way? Yeah, good stuff. So tell me, I feel like one of the things that was interesting for me was so one of the topics we talked about sort of rationality, and there's also this.
I get so excited every time I hear this word.
Good. I'm so glad.
I just get too excited. Yes. All
so we have rationality, which is this kind of how do we think better? How do we sort of achieve our goals? How do we be and there's a broad way you can have the definition. There's more narrow ways. And then there's also this sort of effective altruism movement that goes alongside of it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of maybe more impact conscious rationality, or sort of rationality towards impact, maybe would be a way of putting it. And one of the things that, as we were talking about kind of creativity and sort of finding creative ways of doing different niches or different types of work, one of the things that I found really interesting is that when I see people who are sort of creating companies or projects that have some sort of impact angle, it's rarely sort of obvious. It's not an obvious project. It's got some sort of, maybe the impact is almost a little bit of a secondary effect, or it's sort of a sort of strange sort of way of approaching it, but still you can sort of see how it's doing it. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you were thinking about kind of amplifying rationality and stuff like that through Outtalent, because I know you.
Yes. Yes, there's two subjects. So one is how is Outtalent related to rationality?
Yep.
And second, in general, on doing good as a company.
Yeah.
And I believe a better way to build a company is through a concept that is called Ikigai. Have you discussed this?
Tell me.
Yeah. So Ikigai is a Japanese word, which is translated approximately as the reason for being, the meaning of life. And there's different interpretations of it. One interpretation that I like is when your career is what you do, your profession is an overlap of 4 circles. It's like a Venn diagram. One of them is things you're good at. Second is things you enjoy doing. Third thing is things you can get paid for.
Yep.
And fourth thing is things that the world needs.
Nice.
And I believe if you're in the middle of this, it is going to be really great for you personally because you're going to be very happy and going to be very productive, and it's going to be very good for the organization because, it's pretty much product market fit, right? Because you're doing what the market needs, but if you also do what the world needs, because oftentimes it's different, right?
Yeah.
Like climate change is a good example.
Right.
What market needs may not be what the world needs, or AI safety. But if you're really in the middle, then you're going to be very happy, and the whole kind of the world around you will want you to win, right? Because you're doing something good for the world.
Yeah.
So that's the framework that I used to come up with the company, and I would love for more people to use this framework. I think most startups that I've seen don't really think this way. And I thought, like, what are the things that I want to see in the world? Like, where do I want to reroute the future?
Yeah.
And what I want to see is, I want people to be more rational, just generally. And I realized I use the word rationality differently from most people. So I have to specify what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest difference is rational actions is when you do something that is actually better for you, and it does not mean not using emotions or intuition.
Right.
I think it's actually irrational never to leverage emotions, or be emotional, or never to leverage intuition. Sometimes, like you coming to Kyrgyzstan during the pandemic, could actually be rational, but maybe you cannot explain it.
Right.
But you thought of your biases, you thought of your goals, and you feel like, well, for this task, I'm going to use intuition. There's a certain level of risk, but I'm going to take this risk. So I think it's actually rational, even though it's very intuitive and oftentimes unexplainable.
Yeah, and when else would I sort of see how a country like Kyrgyzstan is navigating a pandemic too, right? Like, you know,
I think you're going to gain a lot from this visit. And I think of it as potentially a very rational decision. And rational thinking is critical thinking, where you kind of use the best of human thinking and try to avoid all of the weaknesses of human thinking, like, you know, a lot of the zoo of biases that we have. So that's how I think of the word rationality. So the world I would like to live in is where people are rational. So in the beginning, if you asked me like 10 years ago, I would say I would like to live in a world where everyone is smart and educated. Because in this way, you can have more equality, more democracy, and you don't need to kind of have fences around your house, right? I just visited LA recently, and I was fascinated by this Venice area with the canals, where there's pretty much no fences, like extremely expensive houses, no fences. I thought, like, it would be really cool if the whole world was like this. Everyone has like a nice place, and you don't need to guard against other people. And we can live in, you know, we don't need to have surveillance, and you can have a lot of freedoms where you can use, I don't know, different substances to explore your consciousness. And for that, I think you need people to be smart, but I think the core part of being smart, I think, is rationality. Like, you don't need to know all the physics and chemistry and remember when Napoleon lived, but I feel like rationality is the heart of it, where if you don't have rationality and you read a million books, I don't think it's going to help you, because you can do stupid things otherwise. So I feel like rationality is the core. So my mission is to kind of help people. The way I see it is help spread rationality across the whole world equally. But as a business, you have to do something that people want, something that people like look for, and I love
they know that they want, right?
And I love how Elon kind of came up with how Elon developed Tesla, right? He thought, he was really into electric cars, and he thought electric cars is the future. It's cool and it's good for the environment, and we need to develop them. And at the time, electric cars were completely not sexy. Completely not sexy. And he thought, okay, electric cars are good for the world, but we need to make them really sexy and attractive.
Yeah.
And that's how Tesla is growing, and I love one of my favorite companies. And I thought of the same way of rationality. Like, how can you make rationality sexy?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, one way is it has to deliver some really amazing results. Because for me, the way it helped is, it helped me get great results in my career. And I thought and careers is something I know more about. Like international career, I know something more about than most people, I would say.
Yeah.
And I thought I should do something there, and I should deliver amazing results in a career. So where people can go from place A to place B, we could be 10x or 100x in any dimension.
Yeah.
And once you deliver that, then people would kind of want to learn, like, how do I do the same? And one of the answers will be rationality.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's kind of at the heart of our company. And kind of also we test the hypothesis.
Right? Is that
it's right? It's one of our 4 values. Yeah. It's kind of be more rational.
Yep.
And that's the way that's what makes me really excited, that I can deliver this through an organization, and I believe it's working.
Nice.
We help 25 people get top jobs, like at top companies like Google and Facebook, and these are the companies they write in. When people come to Outtalent, we ask them, what are the top 10 companies you want to join? Yeah. So they write in, and in the region we were operating, the Russian-speaking region, number 1 was Google, number 1 was second was Facebook, and really like our top employers represent that. Number 1 is Google, number 2 is Facebook. So I believe it's working.
Nice.
And we now spreading it around the world.
Well, I thought that was so interesting because you both, because you have to have criteria on sort of who you're accepting into the program, and then you also sort of, develop their skills and stuff, right? And so I thought it was interesting that you both kind of have rationality and critical thinking as something that you're looking for in people, and it also feels like you're trying to help them develop that in order to sort of further themselves, right?
Yes. Yeah. In the beginning, we were just looking for already existing rationality, because we did not have time to teach, sunk cost fallacy. For now, we still don't.
What is that? I forget what that is.
Sunk cost fallacy?
Oh, sunk cost. Yeah.
Sunk cost.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
It's, I love this concept, and I'm really always looking for do I have sunk cost somewhere in my life? I have
just for folks who might not know.
Please explain.
Okay. Yeah, so it's, sunk cost fallacy is basically like, if you've, you can only act from where you are, right? And so, even if you've, say, poured a ton of money into a boat or a job or something like that, and it's no longer working for you, or it's no longer wanting what you want to do, you can only act from where you are, and you have to sort of ignore the fact that you've already sunk a bunch of cost into whatever that you are trying to decide whether to continue or not. And it's there's kind of like a colloquialism, like throwing good money after bad money or whatever. Like it's like, do you put more money into something that you already put into a lot of money into that isn't working out or whatever, right? Yeah. So
it's like I already invested a lot of money in this stock. So,
right. Yeah.
But I think the most popular one is when you're studying for a long time for something, like being a doctor as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
And I have a friend who's like studied to be a doctor and then worked as a doctor for some time, and then he realized that it's not his thing.
Right.
But you already invested in some ways, like 8 years of your life, and then he realized he wanted to be a software engineer, so he switched. But he realizes that a lot of his knowledge is actually not going to be applicable. Well, it depends on your philosophy. You could say it's always useful, it will come out in some way. But that's one of the difficulties for people, is because they feel they don't want to, there's like a loss aversion. They don't want to feel like they lost a lot of time, but it can really mess up your life in the future if you just keep doing what is not best for you.
It's more, loss aversion being it's more painful to give up something than you feel good about getting something, right? Yeah.
Yes. And so I am fascinated by those concepts, and I would love for us to start teaching them at some point. Yeah. We're not yet there, but we are getting there. For example, for now, I found an online course which teaches critical thinking, and now if we see that some people may have a problem with it, based on the interview,
Yep.
We starting to recommend it as an experiment.
Yep.
And the first person I recommended it to took it really well.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I think he took it well, and he was very grateful because he was not familiar with a lot of those concepts.
Yep.
And he thought they're actually very useful for his life and his career. So we want to do more of that, and we want to make it much more explicit that we're looking for critical thinking.
Yeah.
And rational actions, it's like a lot of it we test because we have a trial period. Before you join Outtalent, there's like a 3-week, used to be 6 week. There's like a multi-week period where we see if people are doing what they're supposed to do. So that's how we kind of check their rational actions.
Nice. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? Because you used to see a lot of the kind of absurd questions that felt like they were testing critical thinking skills, like, you know, how do you, how, like you'd hear these, you know, how many golf balls fit in a truck, or like, you know, how do you get, like, you have these sort of like crazy mind experiments that that Microsoft would ask. But I feel like the way that I've seen those sort of critical thinking skills, or maybe something that's kind of like adjacent to it but close, is just in interviews, you know, where you ask like, you know, oh, well, like, let's design a system together. Like, how are we going to design a system that does X, Y, and Z? And you just kind of like see how willing people are to like ideate with you, to think creatively, to sort of critique their own ideas as they're doing it, right? It's not the sort of like, there's a specific answer to this, right? It's like, how do we be creative together?
Yes, and you can see if people are used to meta thinking.
Right.
Right. It's like, oh, I want to say this, but I could be wrong. Mm-hmm. That's when I hear that, I already feel like that's already unusual.
Yeah.
A lot of times people just say, when they choose a technology, kind of, if you ask them, how would you build this type of service? They just say, I would use this technology, and you ask why, and it's like, well, it's the only one I know, or they just come up with like, oh, it's faster. Like, is it always faster? Mm-hmm. No, it's faster in certain cases, not in other cases. But a lot of times people just don't get into that depth. Mm-hmm. They just have this very abstract, high-level thinking where it's just like, oh, this is better than this, or this is faster than this.
Sure.
But with critical thinking, you go into details and you self-analyze.
Yeah. Awesome. So, you know, one of the I like, you know, one of the things that, you know, we were talking a little bit about on the rationality stuff that I feel like is so important that you were sort of pointing at is like, if we can raise this level of rationality, I think it helps out in so many different ways, right? And maybe there's maybe you could also call it wisdom, or there's like a Venn diagram where there's sort of parts that are both of that, but sort of this raising this sort of rationality or wisdom, both, I thought it was interesting to think of it both from like, you know, everybody, right? And like citizenry, and also like of leadership and of sort of government and stuff like that. And it feels like such a critical way of kind of improving the world. I'm curious if we can kind of take that and pivot towards kind of Kyrgyzstan
Yes.
in general, and sort of where we can talk for a minute about what it would look like for Kyrgyzstan to kind of like flourish and sort of grow over the next few decades.
Yeah, and again, my approach, my hammer to all the nails is, you know, rationality. And actually, so I had this view at the CFAR training, and my view was different from other people. For a lot of people, the view is I kind of agree with that too. So like, it's most important to focus on making sure some people are more rational, right? Say, top AI developers, if they are rational, they're gonna come up with super intelligence. That's the most important thing, and
sure.
I kind of agree with that view. But that was before Trump became president. Yeah. And I think Trump just showed that what happens is if a lot of people are, you know, not very good at rationality, right? If QAnon is like, if a lot of conspiracy, like if QAnon members get into politics, it just shows what happens. And in Kyrgyzstan, it's somewhat interesting, somewhat similar situation where Ministry of Health is recommending to use a poisonous root to cure coronavirus. Right. And I think some people died. I don't know, but I think some people died, yes. He drank this I think like a liquid from this route
Right.
on national TV.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to when Trump said you should put bleach
Right.
in blood. Or at least Trump didn't do it.
I was going to say, at least this guy put his, money where his mouth is. At least he drank it.
Yeah. So I see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And as long as this is going to happen, we're going to have challenges in politics. We're going to have very strong lobbies. We're going to have populist politicians. And I think the countries where rationality is more distributed, like Sweden, I think, or Switzerland, I think countries work better. They have other weaknesses, like helping people develop their ambition. So I feel like we could strike the right balance. But with Kyrgyzstan, we need to show that rationality, we need to make it sexy, and I think it's becoming so. Like tech is becoming a software engineer is definitely becoming sexier, where when I was getting into college in 2001, like software engineering was one of the least sexy positions. Now, and the business administration was the hottest one. Now, like 2 years ago, I was told that for the first time, software engineering became the most popular department in this college. So times are changing, and I'm sure we can get the same place with rationality. And what's going to happen is people are going to support smarter politicians because it's going to be better for them. And right now it's not the case, absolutely not the case, where people are using their intuition, emotions too much and shortcuts. Always like, oh, he's from my region, or he says nice things. And I mean, it's the same everywhere around the world, pretty much. But I think we do have a bit of a crisis, but it's definitely improving.
I thought it was kind of funny. I think there's also a way of literally making it more sexy, where it's like, when I like attracted to partners now, it's like I like the way you think, right?
When you do what?
Like I like the way you think. Like I'm attracted to the way that you think. Like and call it rationality or whatever, but like that it's. I think there is and it's the same thing with friends. Like I know one of the reasons why I think that I. Like you and I click so much is like I really appreciate the way that you think, right? And like,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here.
So I think the more that those kind of like memes spread, and then once we were talking a little bit on one of the recent episodes about sort of designing desire, or sort of changing what you want. And I think it's totally possible. Like the more that I started to pay attention to the way that people thought and sort of appreciate it, the more that I was kind of attracted to that, right? And I feel like this is something that can sort of grow and change.
And I think like podcasts like yours is just, so you have certain values and like you are now growing them. If you were not doing the podcast, if you were just like watching TV at this time, then you would not be kind of investing in those values. And the more we invest in rationality and similar values, then the more they're gonna win. Yeah,
that's awesome. I think a couple of the things that you were sort of highlighting there seemed real. I think this is across the board in a lot of different sort of political situations, but I think you were sort of pointing at kind of like expanding that circle of care, right? There's this sort of it's a problem in America as well, but it's like you care about yourself and then your family and then kind of like your tribe or tribal affiliations or whatever. But then if you keep growing that to people who are in other tribes, or literally or figuratively, and then to the nation and to the world, and right, like growing that circle of care feels like sort of like a hopefully rational thing that can continue to happen. And then one of the other things that I was struck by was that you have there's amazing sort of activists and folks everywhere that are really trying to make a difference. And it seems like there's a lot of very useful leverage in sort of more developing countries of supporting those activists. And I'm hoping, it's always a little bit tricky because people need to keep, low profile sometimes or whatever, but I hope that we're able to maybe give them a plug in the show notes, because there's some pretty cool people doing pretty cool things here. And it feels like, what might, resources that might make a small difference in, richer countries might make a much larger difference in places like this. So.
Yes. So do you want me to talk about the organizations here? Or?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Tell me here.
I mean, there are some really amazing. Well, in every country there's amazing people, and of course, Kyrgyzstan is one. And people who are like managed to develop and flourish and develop their potential. And I think one of the organizations that I love is CLOP.
Yeah.
It's a news organization, and it's very young. A lot of times they have teenagers, like high school kids, interview politicians on the hottest topics.
Can you spell that for us? It was
KLOOP.
Yep.
And it does a lot of investigative journalism, and it's a news source that I trust more than I trust, New York Times or Washington Post, because it's pretty small, and I don't know the founders, and as any person, they have their biases, but at least kind of once you know the biases, you kind of. Otherwise, you still like if you see some article, you know it's coming from like a genuine place.
Yeah.
And it's done a lot of impact in the country. It sues the government and sometimes wins, which is amazing in this region. I think it sued the Ministry of Justice, and it won. It's kind of amazing.
Nice.
It uncovered a lot of corruption in the country, and these were like, again, teenagers oftentimes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it's the only person invited to TED. He became a TED fellow, Bektur Iskander, from Central Asia.
Nice.
So it's a fascinating organization, and we have people like Zere. She's a singer. She sings about feminism and like how women are having problems after they choose the way they dress, because kind of predominant religion is Islam, and before that it was secular during Soviet Union, so it's a transition, and women feel increasingly more challenges.
Yeah, some of her stories are incredible.
Self-expression.
I said some of her stories are incredible. She's pretty damn brave.
Yeah, she's incredibly brave. Yeah, she got a lot of death threats for her music videos. But I think they're making a lot of progress and raising the consciousness about the topics of like, sexual harassment and raping. A lot of the rapists don't go to jail because they just bribe the judges. So it's kind of brushed under the rug, and it was like that for years. But now she and her, her friends are managing to bring a lot more attention to the subject. And I think she's being very successful with her music videos. So that's another example. And there's many more amazing activists who are changing this country, and I think setting example for other countries, because we've been quite democratic for a really long time in the whole region. It's a difficult region for democracies, and we had the female president also, which is very rare. Rosa Otunbayeva, I think she was amazing. So I think there's a lot to learn from this country, and there's a lot of amazing people to meet.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. There was one random point that I just wanted to touch on when we were talking about the EA stuff and sort of these other ways of creating impact. I just wanted to highlight, because I feel like one of the places that I got stuck with EA was just trying to like find like what's the most important issue that I need to solve, like is it AI safety or whatever, and just be like, okay, like how do I solve this one issue myself? And it seemed to just make things flow a lot easier. What was the Japanese phrase that you had?
Ikigai.
Yeah, Ikigai. When I took a little bit more of a step back and be like, okay, these are sort of big things that I care about, maybe have like 5 or 6, and then find the ways that were sort of aligned with maybe one of them with the Ikigai. Because I feel like you can just drive yourself nuts in EA if you're just trying to solve, like if you go the other way around where you're like, okay, what's the biggest like specific problem that I have to solve, and then
like for example, I think sometimes it could be like organizing an amazing party. Could be a very rational thing to do.
Yes.
Because you're bringing certain people together
Yep.
with certain values, and they have a great time, they bond. Right? I think parties is an amazing vehicle also for change, and you doing this podcast. And sometimes you can rationally explain the logical reasons, sometimes you cannot. And or you doing your projection mapping.
Sure, yeah.
I think if you stop doing it, I feel like you're doing something wrong probably.
I appreciate that.
Like if you do more projection mapping, I feel like you're doing something right. If that's one of your passions. I feel like, and sometimes you cannot connect the dots. I think it's Steve Jobs that connects the dots moving forward. So you have to be, use intuitions a little bit.
That's awesome. Are there any other things that you feel like maybe we should cover today that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I can just remind people that we launched Outtalent.
Yeah, please plug away.
Globally. We've been working on this for 2 years. In this region, a Russian-speaking region, and I believe we accomplished a lot. We helped 25 people get jobs at top companies of their choice. And in our last group of 9 people, every single one graduated and got at least 2 offers from these top companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. In average, they got 3, and average salary is more than 110K, just the base salary, plus there's a lot of stock usually and bonuses, which is quite a big change if you're coming from this region. So I'm very proud of our results, and if you know any developers that want to 10x their career and get into an amazing company, they can go to outtalent.com. We are now much more broad, first of all, internationally. Second of all, we are opening up to smaller companies, not just giant tech corporations, but smaller companies and remote companies as well. So really encourage everyone to tell their friends who are software engineers.
That's awesome. I hope they do. And I really liked the model you were sort of sharing of, Outtalent being the, there's like a bunch of different 10x jumps you can do, right? And Outtalent being kind of the like, maybe you're making 10K a year to like 100K a year, and then like Y Combinator being like the 100K to like $1 million in a year or whatever it is. And,
So if you see just to simplify, if you think of the income, I think where we're good at is to help people get from 10K a year, $10K a year income to 100K. Honestly, with stocks, they're getting close to $1 million sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So that's where, if you think of the career as like a staircase, like a stairs, that's the big stair we help people step over. And then there's other stairs, like Y Combinator helps get further, and people become billionaires through doing startups. And then there are things like, for example, Bill and Melinda do with malaria and other, like polio, I believe. Is it polio they focus on?
Yes. I forget. I think that's
anyway, so with vaccinations and bed nets, they're helping the bottom get from one level, like through vaccines, from one level income to this another one. I don't think I should focus there, but I feel like I should focus on this, on this piece.
Well, this is great. And as we're wrapping up here, I just want to, if anybody's been joining us via video, I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to, we've got an amazing local production company here, ALX Productions, that's been doing this. They've been very generous with setting all this up and everything. And there's some beautiful art that you might be seeing behind us here at the No Name Bar here in Bishkek. So it's been such a pleasure to have you on, Tilek. And dude, people also need to just come visit Kyrgyzstan. This place is amazing. So
yes. I invite everyone to Kyrgyzstan personally. Yes, you can message me on your favorite social media. I'll try to connect you to the right people.
That's great. We'll put the links in the show notes. All right, well, thanks, and whoever has a great day.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.